Imagine trading your entire house for a flower, not a golden flower, a dying, rotting plant. You think crypto is volatile? You think NFTs were crazy? In 1637, the Dutch invented the financial bubble, and it didn't just crash the market, it broke reality. Welcome to the golden age of the Netherlands, a time of master painters, global trade, and infinite wealth. But beneath the surface of this economic superpower, a madness was brewing, a madness that convinced the smartest people in Europe that a garden bulb was worth more than a lifetime of labor. This is the story of Tulip Mania, the original crypto crash. To understand why people lost their minds, you have to understand what the tulip actually was in the 1600s. It wasn't just a flower. To the Dutch, it was like alien technology. It came from the Ottoman Empire, modern-day Turkey. Europe had never seen colors like this, intense reds, deep purples, shocking yellows. In a world of mud and gray wool, the tulip was a neon sign that screamed, "I am rich." It became the ultimate status symbol. If you were a wealthy merchant in Amsterdam, you didn't buy a Ferrari, you planted a tulip garden. But there was a problem that every modern Bitcoin investor understands: scarcity. Tulips are incredibly slow to reproduce. You plant a seed, and you wait 7 to 12 years for a flower. You cannot print more tulips. You cannot speed it up. The supply was hard capped by nature, and then the market found a glitch. The most expensive tulips were the ones that looked like flames, petals with white streaks running through red. They were called broken tulips. They were spectacularly beautiful. But nobody knew why they looked like that. We know now that it was actually a disease, the mosaic virus. The flower was dying, and in its final struggle, it produced these incredible patterns. This introduced the element of gambling. You could plant a cheap, plain bulb, and if you got lucky, if the virus struck, that bulb would break and suddenly be worth a fortune. It was a lottery ticket buried in the dirt. By 1634, the price of these rare bulbs started to climb. And climb, and climb. At first, it was just rich people trading with rich people. But greed is contagious. By 1636, the mania had infected the common man. Weavers, carpenters, chimney sweeps, they looked at their rich neighbors and thought, "Why am I working 14 hours a day when I can just buy a bulb and sell it next week for double?" But there was a logistical issue. You can only dig up tulip bulbs in the summer. For the rest of the year, they have to stay underground. So how do you trade them in the winter? The Dutch invented a solution, the futures market. They called it wind handle, the wind trade. They weren't trading bulbs anymore. They were trading pieces of paper that promised a bulb 6 months from now. This changed everything. You didn't need the flower. You didn't even need the money up front. You just needed a signature. It was the 17th century equivalent of leverage trading. And just like modern crypto markets, when you add leverage to hype, things get dangerous fast. The winter of 1636 was the peak of the insanity. The prices reached levels that make no mathematical sense. Let's look at the Semper Augustus. This was the Bitcoin of the era, the alpha asset. A single bulb of the Semper Augustus was valued at 500 guilders. Let me put that in context. For that same amount of money, you could buy a luxury mansion on the Grand Canal in Amsterdam. You could buy a ship. You could feed an entire village for a year. Or you could have one flower bulb. There is a historical record of a trade for a slightly cheaper bulb, the Viceroy. To buy one Viceroy bulb, a man traded 2 lasts of wheat, 4 lasts of rye, 4 fat oxen, 8 pigs, 12 sheep, 2 barrels of wine, 4 barrels of beer, 1,000 pounds of cheese, a bed, a suit of clothes, and a silver cup. He traded a fully stocked farm for a root that fits in your pocket. That is the definition of euphoria. There is a famous story from this time. It might be a legend, but it perfectly captures the absurdity. A wealthy merchant had just bought a Semper Augustus bulb for a fortune. He left it sitting on his counting house counter. A sailor, just returned from a long voyage, came in to deliver a message. The merchant gave the sailor a fine red herring fish for breakfast as a tip. The sailor saw what looked like an onion on the counter. He thought, "This onion would go great with my fish." So he slipped it in his pocket and left. An hour later, the merchant realizes his Semper Augustus is gone. He panics. He runs out to the docks. And there, sitting on a coil of rope, is the sailor. He is finishing the last bite of his breakfast. He had just eaten the equivalent of $5 million. The merchant wept. The sailor was thrown in jail. But the sailor didn't understand. To him, it wasn't a fortune. It was just a dry, tasteless onion. And in a way, the sailor was the only sane person in the country. Every bubble pops the same way. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. February 1637, an auction in the town of Haarlem. The auctioneer holds up a bag of bulbs. He asks for a starting price. Silence. He lowers the price. Silence. Suddenly, a cold realization swept through the room. The greater fool theory had run out of fools. There was nobody left to buy. Panic set in instantly. Everyone rushed to sell. But in a crash, liquidity disappears. You have a piece of paper that says a bulb is worth 5,000 guilders, but nobody will give you 5 guilders for it. Within days, the price of tulips fell by 90%, then 99%. People who had been paper millionaires on Tuesday were bankrupt by Friday. Merchants refused to honor the contracts. The courts were paralyzed. Judges threw up their hands and said, "This is gambling, not business. We can't help you." The fallout was devastating for the middle class. The rich survived. They had land and gold. But the weavers and the bricklayers who had mortgaged their tools to buy into the hype, they were ruined. The Dutch government eventually stepped in and allowed people to cancel their contracts for a 10% fee. But the trust was gone. The wind trade had stopped blowing. It is easy for us to look back at the Dutch and laugh. We think, how could they be so stupid? It was just a flower. But look at the world today. We buy digital images of monkeys for millions, and we trade coins named after dogs. We buy stocks in companies that make no profit. The technology changes. We move from bulbs to blockchain. But human psychology, that never changes. Greed, FOMO, the belief that this time is different. The Tulip Mania teaches us the most important lesson in economics. Value is subjective. A thing is only worth what someone else is willing to pay for it. And when the music stops, you'd better make sure you're holding something real, not just wind. If you enjoyed this dive into financial history, make sure to subscribe. See you soon, and thanks for watching.